Everybody, nice to meet you. My name is Evan. I oversee our expansion teams here at Drift, and been here about 5 years. Super excited to talk about how to sell the C-suite faster. We have an amazing list of people here to talk through that with us today. Before I pass over to Brooke, one thing we want to get going in the chat is, what is your biggest sales outreach pet peeve? So I want you all to think about that and put it into the chat, and we can kind of go through and see what are some of the trends that we're seeing across the team. And so with that, going to pass over to Brooke first to introduce herself, and then we'll get to Katie and Ted.
I was just trying to think of what pet peeve to add in. I'll do that after I introduce myself. Hi, I'm Brooke. I am a director of sales at Drift. I work hand in hand with Evan. My team is primarily new business. We do a little bit of expansion, but then we hand the accounts over to Evan's team to take care of those customers for the long term. So that's my role, and I love doing these webinars. It's fun to talk about this stuff. I could do it all the time, and happy to be here with everyone. I'll pass it to Katie.
Thank you, Brooke. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm Katie, an account executive at Outreach, based out of London. I saw in the chat we've got someone from Germany, which I think is the closest to me that I've seen here. But yeah, I've been at Outreach for about 3 years now, done both an SDR role and an account executive role. So yeah, looking forward to sharing some perspectives on selling to the C-suite. I'll pass it over to you, Ted.
Yeah, great. I'm seeing lots of pet peeves roll in. I think it's funny we said the biggest pet peeve. That assumes that there's more than one for each of us, but maybe that's a separate discussion. Hey, everyone, Ted McKenna. I'm a founding partner of a company called DCM Insights. We're a research company. I also co-wrote a book called The Jolt Effect, which some of you might have heard recently with Matt Dixon. You might know from the Challenger Sale Days and so forth. So excited to join the discussion today.
Awesome. Yeah, and we are seeing some good pet peeves. Looks like no phone number, no ability to see account level intent. That's a big one. So those are all things for sure. As any salesperson, those would be tough things to kind of overcome. The first question we're going to start off with, this is the understanding the most common pain points today for B2B executives. And we were talking a little bit offline about this one, Brooke. About some of the things that you're kind of seeing in the field with reps, and from talking to a lot of executives, and this kind of idea of consumption and a lot of people buying technology. And so wanted to kind of kick it over to you in terms of what you're seeing today, and then obviously we'll kind of get more perspective from Ted and Katie as well.
We definitely are talking directly with more C-level executives than ever before. I think in my sales career, I can't think of a time this number of C-level execs have been involved in a deal that is relatively high velocity. These aren't deals that take a year to close, but they are deeply involved. And I think that the pain point tied to those executives being deeply involved has to do with what we've seen in terms of the rate of purchasing technology. For us at Drift, we're very deep in tech, SaaS to be specific. And one of the biggest changes happened coming out of the pandemic. There had been like this 10+ year buildup of tech purchasing. And I don't know if you call it overconsumption, but definitely heavy consumption with the cloud. And not long ago, anyone in any department at like director plus level had some budget that they could largely spend without a ton of discussion or case building. I'm not saying that it was easy on either side for buyers or sellers, but they, had a lot of room to make decisions, and they didn't necessarily have to go get buy-in from other teams, even if what they were purchasing maybe impacted those other teams, and it could all happen really fast. And then that accelerated even more during the pandemic, and coming out of that, it was almost like, this hangover. And that made its way to the C-level execs that we're talking to now, as they realize that, their teams, even with the best intentions, had bought all this technology, but there was underutilization, overlap of tools. There was, attacks on teams in terms of bandwidth to get going on software. And so we sort of saw all of that happening, and we were watching at the C-level, these execs sort of start to untangle a lot of what had gone on. And they still wanted to keep their teams moving fast, right? Like there are a lot of things that need to be purchased, but they had to start to smooth out what that evaluation process looked like so they could make sure that, everything was working at scale across all of their teams. And that added a lot more steps to the process, where, now we are building more business cases. We're talking to multiple departments, and this all ties back to that pain point that the C-level has right now, which is I'm trying to keep my teams moving fast without over consuming and getting too tangled up with too many vendors. So that's the biggest thing that I've seen lately. Katie, what about you?
I completely agree with you there, Brooke. I think I've also seen that a lot of companies have just got this excess in their tech stack. And now, as you said, they've come to realize this, and this sort of mandate of consolidation is absolutely what I'm seeing as well. I think alongside this, for a lot of C-suites, the same kind of themes keep on coming up. So the team capacity has gotten tighter. Budgets have been cut, and they're basically being asked to do more with less. So the sort of themes that I keep on seeing is, with this in mind, how can we make sure that we're efficient and we're predictable and we're productive? So I think over the past few years, there's been this real mandate of just growth, and growth at any cost. But it really seems now it's being clamped down, and people are really striving for making sure that growth is profitable, which is really where efficiency comes in. So yeah, I think this all really does feed back into your point around consolidation as well, and just making sure that from both a rep level and a technology stack, everything is efficient and consolidated. You're nodding there, Ted. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, totally. I see tons of overlap. I mean, so we just finished this giant study of 2.5 million sales conversations, and indecision was the big thing that popped up. I think you guys are making some really good points about the evolution of especially tech purchases and how it's impacting how people are making decisions. And I think, one difference we see now versus maybe 2 or 3 years ago is that it now feels less likely we're going to lose that we're going to lose to a competitor, and more likely we lose to no decision. As in the past, it's more about how different are we versus our 2 or 3 big competitors, because they're trying to decide who's best. Because I'm going to spend money, I just need to figure out who I'm going to spend money with. And now we see more and more deals dying to no decision, and specifically sort of indecision that they're gripped by. And there's lots of evidence that that's on the rise too, for lots of secular reasons. Like one of the big reasons people succumb to indecision is because there's just so many options out there. They get kind of stuck, right? Or too much information out there that just paralyzes us all. And that's not ending, right? There's more information and more options out there every single day. And so this is what we're hearing a lot is sort of decision makers in general and their teams really sort of just stalling out and sort of gripped by indecision. Should I move forward? When should I move forward? How should I move forward? And so forth.
I think that's a really interesting perspective. And I think that ties in nicely to what Brooke and Katie are both talking about, which is, you've seen this kind of growth, this like democratization of purchasing within these companies. And there's more and more, we've all seen the list, the MarTech lists and other lists as well, of the amount of software companies is really exploding, right? So you just have more and more options, but that's not always necessarily a good thing when it comes to, actually making a decision, or on the other side, being a seller where you not have to compete against a bunch of other players that maybe there isn't a massive amount of differentiation in. Ted, I think one more question there would be curious, like how are we've kind of talked about this pain point around, consolidation and, also leading to indecision because what companies have grown really quickly. How are you seeing, these executives solve for that?
Yeah, well, so on the sales side, I think one is kind of understanding that it's happening. And by the way, past purchase regrets can feed a little bit of this indecision too, right? Like who among us doesn't feel like you've been oversold or overbought, in the past? And so those things can drive more hesitancy and more decision on this next type of purchase. we in the study, we found lots of different 4 specific behaviors that kind of address the indecision fears that buyers have. I mentioned 2 of them already. The third fear is outcome uncertainty. So who's ever felt this way? No matter how many case studies you send them, no matter how many reference calls they've done, no matter how many proof points you've given them, they just still don't feel like it's enough, right? Like I'll be the one exception. So that's kind of the third fear, is like, how much proof do you need? Like, just like make that leap of faith. I think Brooke makes a good point. They're just less likely or less willing to make that leap of faith. And so what the best sellers do, there's kind of 4 techniques. JOLT is an acronym. So yeah, we want to jolt past a customer indecision. But the first one, the J, is a judging level of indecision. So I have to understand and measure the degree or the intensity of that indecision and incorporate it into how I think about qualifying that opportunity or forecasting its likelihood to close. The second one is offering a recommendation. That's the O. So we can't just let the buyer on their own decide, is it this option or that option, this configuration or that configuration, this integration or that integration, even after they believe that they should buy from you, that they want to buy, that they need to buy. They still have lots of decisions they have to make to get to the point where they actually transact. So what the best sellers are doing is they're being more personal in making a very specific recommendation of, this is the package, this is the configuration, this is how to kind of think about this decision. So that's offering a recommendation. The L is about limiting the expiration. That kind of gets into that analysis paralysis that we know buyers ask for. It can be very tempting, I think, for a seller to get sort of head faked by the buyer who keeps wanting more demos. Right? Like, can I have it just another demo and another demo? And at first it's like, this is great. They're loving it. Like, they won't stop calling me. They won't stop asking for it. The high performers thinking, hold on, like, why wasn't the last demo enough? Like, is it really the 7th demo is really going to change your decision calculus? So we've got to find ways to kind of limit that expiration and keep them into that sort of productive, reasonable amounts of expirations. We talk about kind of the techniques there. And then the last one is taking risk off the table, which sounds a little bit obvious. Like, in a situation when that buyer is gripped by uncertainty, I've got to find ways to make it feel less risky, give a little bit of decision protection. Some of this is just about setting the right expectations, like being careful about when the buyer has outsized expectations. Like, they see that case study that looks like it's like the perfect scenario that is like really difficult to replicate, but that's what they start like pegging their ROI projections to. And now it's hard to build consensus around. It's hard to get people to believe that that's going to actually happen. And so simple expectation setting can make a difference. But in the book, we go into detail about what we call safety nets and the ways in which we can offer additional safety protection, which we don't do enough in B2B sales. We can have a whole separate conversation about that. But that's the short version, of a 250-page book of kind of what's the solution set with respect to dealing with indecision.
Yeah, no, that was great cliff notes. And I think just to kind of summarize a little bit before I move into more of the tactical side, I think the common pain points around, proliferation of software, a lot of it not being used, regrets over past decisions being made, also impacting decisions. And then, Katie was talking about doing more with less. Certainly something that's on every executive's mind. So I think that's a really good way to kind of frame the conversation for today. So, shifting gears a little bit to the tactical side, I think there's no one else better to kick us off there than, someone who's seen a lot of success as a salesperson at outreach, which, I think a lot of people, outreach is synonymous with outbound. So, we kind of know the challenges that are happening today, what they're dealing with. I think we had a good discussion around that. But Katie, for you, what is successful outbounding to the C-suite look like?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic. I think the first thing to recognize here is that no matter what industry you're in, when you're outbounding to the C-suite, they are absolutely like inundated with prospecting messages just like yours. So a few pieces of advice to think about here. So number one, you've obviously got to make yourself stand out. Like I said, by the time they go into a meeting and then come back out, they might have 10 new emails from other sales reps also asking for 30 minutes of their time. So one way that we quite like to go about this is sending people personalized gifts. So do your research. Maybe they really like a sports team, for example, or like they went to a certain college or university, and being able to leverage that to send them things. So one example that we did with one of my target accounts last year was, I think we saw it on LinkedIn, but this person really liked the drink Guinness, like pints of Guinness. And so we got a Guinness glass, got their name scratched into it, carved into it, and sent it to their office with like a really personalized note attached. And literally, as we got the notification saying that it had been delivered, there was an email coming through from them, because it's just breaking through that noise. So I know that's kind of excessive, but just any little things you can do like that really, really make you stand out. I am also a big believer, outside of, sending gifts to people, that the quickest and the best way to book a meeting is often on the phone. I think if you're picking up the phone and making cold calls to people, you're already above, 80-90% of sales reps that aren't doing that and that are just sending out emails to people. So just from picking up the phone, you're already giving yourself advantages. But obviously, it is important to keep a multi-channel approach, sending emails, LinkedIn messages, and that kind of thing. So if you are sending emails, big tip here is send it yourself on your iPhone first, because chances are, if you're speaking to a C-suite, they're probably reading that email on their phone as they're running between one meeting or another place in the office. So just making sure they can see it on their phone without having to scroll through multiple pages is also speaking in a language that works for them. I don't know if that seems similar to what you're doing at Driftbrook.
It all sounds very relevant. And like, I always just think, when you're thinking about the C-suite, what do they have the least of? Time. So they don't have a lot of time to read what you're sending them, to talk to you, to take a meeting. I'd avoid asking for 30 minutes, actually, right? Like in actuality, you probably want that C-suite individual to delegate you down to someone who can start the conversation, but now that door's open with a CRO or CEO or whoever it is that you have in your buying committee, where you can come back around to them, recap them. You're not going to have your initial exploratory call with them anyway. So if you send a really brief, to the point, well-researched email to the C-suite, ask a question, like get right to the point, but don't ask them for 30 minutes. You're probably going to get a higher conversion rate. I like your point about, making it easy for them to look at it on their phone, coming and going from meetings, because that's the reality of the day-to-day. But I can't impress enough how important research is and just knowing your audience. I think that all of us in sales get into periods of time where we kind of like go through the motions, where, I'm going to send the same sort of email to everyone because it worked. And then it stops working and we don't change. So consider what you're sending, how brief it is, and what you're asking for when thinking about the C-suite.
Just to jump in there as well, Brooke, I love what you said there about not asking for 30 minutes or a big demo, because it seems like a big ask and something hard to like buy into. So something that we've been kind of A/B testing and seeing work is just open to learning some ideas as your sign off on your email. And, it feels easy to buy into, and like, who's not open to just learning and picking up a few ideas? So that's, it's something we've just been see work.
I like this 2-3 minute. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think the thing I heard from both of you, and this is kind of like from your side, Ted, like the expectations piece, right? So when you engage with C-levels, like that expectation of their time. And so I think it ties in nicely, you were discussing earlier around, what are your expectations for engaging with the C-level executive, and like, how do you make it successful?
Yeah, totally. I love the 2-3 minute thing, but I think be careful, like when you get, let's say that's successful, make sure you keep it at 2 or 3 minutes, because you want to like come through it. And by the way, think about the trust you earn when that happens. Like, that's part of the reason they're hesitating to give you 2 minutes, because they think what you really mean is 25 minutes, but I'm just saying 2 minutes. So I think that's a really smart, is to try to time box it. I think, think about like Brooke, you made a good point about like research and what's going on with this specific industry, and sort of helping you tailor that message. Like, think about the meetings these people might have just come from when they're about to read that email, like the tough budget meeting where they're making hard decisions about layoffs. To then open up an email and ask for a demo, it feels like it's a hard, gear shift there. And so, putting in just a little bit of detail about, here's why this isn't important right now, but tailored in the lens of like your industry and what's going on there in that moment.
100%. I think these are all really good best practices and good discussion around. I think going back to the expectations piece of, we're all being asked by our leadership, everyone probably here on this call, to get more C-levels involved in your deals. Like I probably don't know a person who you go into a deal review with where that's being important. So understanding how you're going to do it, why you're going to do it, why they should care. And then, I think I've typically found if you do a 30-minute conversation with a C-level, they always show up 5 to 8 minutes late. A lot of times it's because they're running from meeting to meeting. If you can give them 5 minutes back of their time and actually just take 25 minutes, that can go a long way to you building that relationship with them, where they feel they trust you and they see you as that trusted advisor. So I think those are some really good, some good best practices that we're seeing. So we've talked about, what executives are dealing with. We've kind of talked about a little bit of the problem statement, and then going to some good best practices. Katie kicked us off around how do you actually get in front of that person? What are the things that work to help you cut through the noise and get their attention? Now you have their attention, you're hopping on a call. So, Ted, from your perspective, monitoring a lot of sales calls, a lot of monitoring, a lot of sales reps over a long, long period of time. Love to kick it off to you in terms of what you've seen work and rapport building with an executive to lead a successful discovery call.
Yeah, I mean, look, discovery is a necessary but difficult thing, and people have been trying to crack this code for a long time. And so I can't tell you that we have the exact code to make it absolutely perfect. But I have seen enough data and listened to enough calls to tell you that you're better off if this feels like a two-way conversation than if it feels like you're just there to extract information from this person's brain. And so what you'll hear often when people talk about discovery is the next word out of their mouth is questions. You have to ask great questions. And of course that's true, but we should be following up those questions in ways that either shares an insight, but I think more importantly, just allows for some actual back and forth discussion. When you look at some of the high performer conversations that we looked in our study, it feels almost like I don't want to say a debate, but kind of like a debate where you don't want to be combative. So that's why I didn't want to use the word debate, but it does feel like there's even comfort for some amount of overlap in that discussion. And so that's what I would encourage people to think about, or maybe there's a good question you can ask that allows for that type of back and forth exchange, or sharing a piece of insight on the back end of, this resonates with me because this happens here at our organization, just something to kind of get that discussion going.
For sure. I think understanding the executive before you get to that conversation is a big piece of this. And I think, Katie, from your side, again, kind of being in the field every day, getting ready for these conversations, what are some of the things that you put into place that help you really nail that conversation with your first conversation with an executive?
Yeah, so I think we kind of touched on it earlier, but just doing your research is so important before you're getting on a call with an executive. And just trying to find something above and beyond, oh, the weather's really bad today, or where are you dialing in from, that they probably get asked on every single sales call that they joined. If you can get on there knowing that, they like a sports team, or you maybe went to the same university, or even if there's not something really specific about them on their LinkedIn, but you can see that their company has just released a new product, ask them about how that's going, just so you can, from the get-go, they respect you more because they know that they're not just wasting their time and they're the next person in the revolving door of all the prospects you're speaking to today. There's a really kind of specific and intentional reason for speaking. I think that's just a great way for them to have that respect with you from the get-go. What are you thinking, Brooke?
I'd add on to that, at the end of the day, rapport is really about relating to each other. Mm-hmm. And so some ways to do that are talk about the kids, talk about sports teams, whatever that might be. Again, the higher up you go, I think that C-level execs appreciate it when you understand their day-to-day. So that rapport building at the top of the call can be as simple as I know you have 25 minutes for this. I totally get that. Talk about another 2 or 3 CEOs or CROs that you were talking to this week that were just like them. That helps build some credibility for you too, because you do this all the time. And now that like relationship is being built around you understanding the nature of their job and the fact that they're on this call in the first place and that you're going to be tight, you're going to get to business quicker than usual. They'll tell you if they want to chit chat, right? They'll push back and be like, oh, it's all right, we can spend some time. But for the most part, you'll build a lot of credibility up front by being a little bit more brief than you usually are, maybe with some other roles that you sell into. And I love the point about doing research and knowing something relevant about their company that would take more than 2 clicks to figure out, right? So not like what you see on their homepage, but what you see when you dig through something that their competitors are doing or something in an earnings report that you can bring up that shows that you can play at that same level, that you're not, at a basic level and you should be on the call with them.
Yeah, if it's a public company and you have, earnings reports, those are great places to look for that type of information. I love the notion of it being relatable, as opposed, like, rapport feels like a nebulous thing, but if I could just find a way to be relatable to you as an individual, I think that's kind of the goal, right?
100%. I think something I saw in the chat that I really liked was, don't ask a discovery question that you can Google, or ask a question that you can Google.
That's pretty funny.
I think that's a great framework. I feel like we're coaching reps, or we were reps ourselves. I think that level of expectation, like being relevant with that buyer is so important. I think you have to realize this as you're talking up the chain, is the expectation they have for you as a seller in terms of understanding their business. It just gets more. It just gets higher and higher. I think, and one thing, Ted, I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts here is, given how much you've studied sales reps over a long period of time and studying behaviors and what works, I think that kind of like that Google question points really well to the amount of information that's now out there about companies and about executives. Think about LinkedIn, like why someone got hired. There's a lot of information on Google a few clicks away about these people. Do you feel like when reps are hopping a discovery call, those expectations are higher than maybe they were even like 10 years ago?
That's a good question. I think I think it's a fair point to say that, if you would have spent 5 minutes Googling this, you probably would have known this, right? And more so than 5 or 10 years ago, in part because we're all more savvy with Google and more savvy with this. And there's tools like Zoom Info and others that you can go and find this information. So it's less about I think less of you because you asked that question, and more like you're wasting my time. Right. And my time is really valuable. And now we're like minute 7 and you're asking me things you could have. So why should I spend the next 2 minutes with you if you've just wasted the first 7,
Yeah, totally. It's almost like you those first few minutes are critical to just building up that trust, to opening up that executive to maybe answer that question or kind of open up a little bit more about themselves. I think
what I think this kind of goes wrong is I like that Google question a lot. I'm definitely going to steal that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But it's also the templatized discovery where it's you could go through the form and I'm just asking, and so because of that there's no real discussion on it. I'm just getting the answer. It's recorded. Great. Let me move to the next question. And it's just like what are we doing here? You could have sent this to me and I could have answered over email if that's all you're looking for, So that gets back to the discussion question we had earlier. But I think both of those things could do real damage to again, for me, it's you're trying to get that person to want to spend more time on this problem, not necessarily with you, but on this problem. And so that's the frame of reference. It's you don't waste my time.
Right. Earning that trust and being able to, kind of earn the right, to get more time. And Katie, we had talked about this a little bit around the value hypothesis and going into the conversation with that ready. And we've seen some really great tactics, even with our own teams of, first time meeting with a CMO, they'll send a video before that initial conversation, kind of warm up that person to talk through a value hypothesis of what they've learned so far from the team. Are there, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the value hypothesis side of this and how that helps with the the discovery portion from what you're saying?
Yeah, so this is something we've maybe been doing for like 9 months or so now, but when you've done that research previously, coming to that first meeting, especially with the C-suite, with a hypothesis slide on from your research what you think might be going on. So, you know, things like they released a new product a few months ago. Maybe your hypothesis is that they're really focused on upselling this to their existing customers. It can be things that are pretty simple and, you know, maybe wouldn't take a genius to work out. But again, that just really shows them that you aren't just outbounding every single account, hoping to get any lead you can find. You've really, again, got that like intentional reason for speaking to them. And just sometimes even from putting pretty basic things on it, you get reactions like, wow, were you in my internal meeting last week? And that kind of thing, which this kind of, yeah, goes back to the rapport question of how can we build that credibility as a seller? I just think that's a great way to kick it off.
Katie, you bring a good point. Like, I think the other thing, I mean, this might be maybe not the best audience to say something. This might be kind of controversial for you guys, but like,
Please do.
I think that email automation is kind of hurt on this, because if you feel like I'm one of 100,000 people that just got this exact same email, it's like, why would I ever read anything else? Everything else you send me is going directly into the spam filter. You know, so at least make it feel like you actually wrote it, you know, even if it happens to be something that you're piping to a lot of people. So I guess I shouldn't blame the tech. It's the person, right?
Yeah,
For sure.
completely agree with you there. I don't think kind of mass blasting out the same email to everyone or getting on a call and, like you said as well earlier, Ted, like following the same script of questions for every single person you speak to. I don't think sales is a one size fits all, even if you are speaking to the same persona. Every engagement, like you just need that personalized approach.
So again, we talked about problem statement. We talked about, you know, what are some tactics to get in front of these people? And then we talked about once you have that conversation, what are some of the ways that you can make sure you make the most of it? Preparation was a big theme. You know, we talked about the need to relate to them, right? Be empathetic, understand their world. Then make sure you kind of earn the right, like Ted talked about, earning the right to get more time with them is kind of a mentality to be thinking about as you approach that conversation. And so, you know, one thing, you know, we're all being asked to get in front of more C-levels and more people. I think one thing that's really challenging as a sales rep is, okay, you get that meeting and like, how do you keep that person involved in the conversation? You know, as you're typically working with their team and they maybe have some involvement there, but I feel like there's a bunch of different theories on like how to do this well. But Brooke, maybe let's start with you around what have you seen work well? How do you keep momentum once you have that person? We know their time is limited. Like, how do you keep that C-level involved as you go through a sales process?
One of the things that we've been working on over the last couple of quarters, it's been going really well, and you can actually see it in the close rates, is to have the involvement at the executive level start with an intro from our executive to their executive. And so as the rep is starting to work on the deal, our CEO or CRO is reaching out directly to that same level individual at the prospects company, just a friendly introduction, opening the door, making sure that there's a direct line of communication between those two and letting them know that our executive is letting that executive know that they're aware that we're working with that company on an evaluation. At the same time, in parallel, the reps are working with multiple contacts to multi-thread across the organization. And then as they're doing their recaps, they're sending much briefer versions of that same recap back up to the C-level that we open the door with through our C-level, so that they can be involved at an arm's length, because they aren't going to jump on every single call during the sales cycle. They can't, and they probably shouldn't. They might jump back in at the end, but they won't be coming in cold without understanding of the value that we're providing, the problems that we're solving, and the outcomes that we're looking for. So that is like 2 quarters in progress and going pretty well. I recommend trying something like that. And it also, I think, like, the secondary benefit of it is it gets your C-suite much closer to the deals in general and closer to the front line, which is just good for the whole organization. So that's been going pretty well for us to just keep them engaged and keep that momentum.
One follow-up question there. You said something about getting more exposure to C-levels in your deal. I think for most salespeople, I felt this way probably at certain points in my career. You're not sure if you want the CRO to know about your deal, right? How do you convince your sales reps that this is like a good idea?
I mean, right now we're just looking at the difference in close rates, and every rep wants to close more deals. So once you show that big of a jump, when our execs are involved, the close rate jumps up quite a bit. So that's a pretty easy win. And I think just in general, there's a good sense of trust on our team from level to level. I think we're very lucky at Drift in that, all of our reps are real team sellers and don't see taking help from others as, a sign that they can't do it on their own or that they're not important. We really are much stronger when we sell together. So I think that's kind of like, for us, woven it a little bit into the fabric of how we do business. We just started to involve our top level execs a little bit more in the past couple quarters.
I might just add there on the team selling approach, which I think I agree is a nice way to kind of surround the buyer organization. We know there's going to be a bunch of stakeholders that will weigh in, and at the end of the day, the senior level, C-level individual, they matter, of course, big time in terms of making that economic decision, but they often defer their team. And so we've got to find ways to spread our bets. I would say, though, be careful a little bit about our research would tell you that when you do involve others and you bring team members into that conversation, how you do it matters quite a bit. Like, you don't want to do that as a way to sort of abdicate responsibility for the process where you're just bringing, Brooke into the conversation and Brooke, take it away. And then you sort of go off into the recesses. It sounds kind of like an obvious point, but you've kind of got to orchestrate that moment, bring that person into the conversation and out. If you don't, you're going to get delegated down to the person you sound like. Right. So if you can't answer those questions, or you're starting to defer to others, you can't be surprised then when the C-level person wants to go around you the next time.
An interesting point.
Yeah, really interesting point. I think what I'd add to that, I love the idea of getting your execs linked up on both sides, and definitely sending status updates to keep them in the loop with what's going on in the sales process. Something that I did quite recently as well that worked quite well is, as you said there, Brooke, they're not going to want to sit through an hour-long demo or watch an hour-long recording of every single feature in the platform. So maybe if there is a, 60, 90-second key thing that's really going to have an impact on them personally, send a little snippet of just that one thing to keep them in the loop and kind of build that excitement and almost tease them a little bit with what they could potentially be getting and seeing. And just making sure that all of those touch points that you're sending out to C-suites are always really low commitment, low ask. We're not asking for lots of time. They're not having to read through loads of things. It's just those short, sharp emails.
That aligns nicely with what a lot of people are putting in the chat, this, approach of keeping them in the loop and making sure like you kind of set the tone of like kind of similar to Ted was saying, that you're setting the tone around like, we're going to keep you involved in the conversation. And Katie has those are great tactical ways of ensuring that low ask emails, things like that. I think it resonates really well with a lot of people are saying that they've seen be successful too.
I'd also know when Katie was going through that, I think it's really smart, and it feels like if I were to capstone it, it's like make it easy, for them.
Yeah.
Right. And you're doing that in part because you're showing you're demonstrating that you understand the process that's necessary to get from point A to point B. Right. And you're engineering it, you're stewarding it, you're keeping them involved, but you're sort of making it feel very easy for them in the process. I think that's a really great way to kind of keep them involved.
One other follow-up question here, because I think it's an interesting, we talk about team selling and the theme of like, it's kind of this, not contradiction, but a little bit of like dichotomy of team selling, but like also the fact of you have to know your stuff, because if you don't, then a C-level all of a sudden is going to maybe see you as being less valuable. How do you balance those two things, or how do you make sure you're seen as a valuable resource while also bringing in the wider team without having it go poorly, right? Or having the C-suite maybe go around you, like we talked about, how do you ensure that you're able to balance those two things well?
I'll jump in there. I think coming to conversations with really strong agendas is really important. So if I'm getting on the call and maybe we're discussing something slightly technical and also a different topic, making sure that you're clearly delegating that out to someone else who's specifically, it's their job to be able to speak about those things, and laying that out from the get-go. So it doesn't just seem like, they've got to the technical topic and now they're having to jump in and save you because you didn't know what the answer was. So I think clearly laying out roles and responsibilities through your sales process is something really important, so that your buyer also maybe knows, hey, if there is something technical, this is the best person for us to go to.
I might just add the roles and responsibilities as laid out in a rehearsal, do pre-call prep and invite call partners to those calls and play that out. You're going to get caught by surprise sometimes that you strive not to, but make sure you note down what those questions are so you don't get caught by surprise next time. But we talk about kind of striving for expertise. And so you have to find your source of authority. Like, your products and your customer experience. You should know those better than your buyer. So at least have that down pat. But I totally agree that roles and responsibilities are really important.
I think, to tack on to that, I think that explaining why you're bringing the individuals in when you're bringing them in is helpful. Because instead of just having someone show up to a call, run that call for you or most of it for you, if you explain why you're doing that, that helps set the tone. And I think number two, also explaining that, assuming we end up in a partnership together, these are individuals that you're going to know or work with, or their teams as our customer. And this is I treat this as the beginning of the relationship in sort of an assumptive sort of way. For us, we'll bring our chief customer officer onto calls. We bring his directors and managers onto calls, depending upon the type of deal that we're working on. Our CRO will jump onto calls because we sell into sales teams and marketing teams, and CROs are, big stakeholders in not only the purchase of the deal, but in making sure that all goes well once they're on board. So I sort of think of it like, we haven't signed a contract yet, but this is what it's like to work with us. You get to know all of us, and it's not just me.
Yeah,
and I think if they do think it's just you, I think that can sometimes be a bit worrying for buyers. Why am I just working with this one person and no one else in the company cares about this? So I think you're also kind of giving reassurance to your buyer that hey, this is an important deal for us. That's why we're getting all of these people and experts involved in whatever they're experts in. So I think it kind of works both ways.
Totally. And I think, to kind of summarize a lot of the points around the preparation being super important, right? So make sure the roles and responsibilities, love that, have clear expectations for not only the customer, but for your team on what the value is that they're going to bring as part of the deal. And then ultimately that's going to allow you to kind of really set the tone of the relationship early on. And Brooke, kind of your point around, especially mid-stage of the deal, you start getting closer to things being finalized. You want the customer to feel hey, this is the beginning of something. We're not just focused on getting the deal done. We're focused on driving the outcomes for you based on what we talked about. We're going to go out there and achieve, right, based on X. And so tying it back to value, I think, is super important. And team selling definitely helps you do that.
Evan, I was laughing at Michael's question about maybe seeing executives step in and say the wrong thing and mess up the deal.
Yeah.
I've been the senior product guy who comes on and I'm too quick to jump to a discount. They're like, shut up, stop doing it.
Yeah, I think it's funny, going back to the preparation, for sure, we've all seen that, right? I think there's an interesting conversation around also titles and competency, to your point. And sometimes you will find executives maybe, just because someone has a title doesn't necessarily mean maybe they understand the business as well as they should be. And those are things I think you have to vet for. And then the preparation side definitely resonates around, think about how many times you've had that conversation, you spend all this time prepping, and then you get into the conversation with the C-level and it does not go at all according to plan, right? Typically it's being hijacked in certain ways. And so I feel like we see that happen all the time as well. But come in, see. So Ted, why don't we start with you? Biggest takeaway from the conversation today in terms of, you know, how do you get in front of the C-suite faster?
Yeah, I mean, I like, I don't remember if it was Katie or Brooke, your point on 2 to 3 minute ask instead of the 30-minute ask. I don't know if that's something we would always advise, or if it's just something that's more specific to this environment. For those of us that are selling to tech companies, we know they've been through probably pretty tough budget cycle in the last quarter or so. And so just being, you know, empathetic of that situation. You know, for me, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the role of indecision it plays, and how we need to make sure we're incorporating that when we're talking to buyers at all points of the decision process, and addressing that fear of messing up, you know, is a really, really important thing right now in today's sales.
My biggest takeaway, like the thing that I heard the most across all of the questions and all of our insights, and then like looking at the chat, is just preparation, you know, like really being ready and tight and thinking through, you know, what this call is for, what this message is for, who am I reaching out to, what's their reality like, and what do they care about, is going to get us further in both booking meetings and closing deals and creating better experiences for the buyers that are involved in our evaluations. But just thinking about the past 45 minutes, that's the thing that came up the most.
Mm. Yeah, and I think to add to that as well, I think just the need when you're speaking specifically to the C-suite as well is just no fluff. We've all kind of said it in different ways, but you've just got to have that agenda kind of nailed down, super tight, no fluff, straight to the point, whether that be when you're either like on the phone or when you're emailing them or whatever it may be. And also just making sure that you've got that rapport so you're standing out as a seller.
Yeah, I think those are all great takeaways. I think for me, a big theme is expectations, and just thinking about expectations in terms of like, how do you engage with the C-level? What can you realistically be asking for them? Like the low ask thing, I think is super important. And then ultimately, you know, how are they involved in your deal? And just understanding that as a seller, I think is super important, so that you can have the right buying process, both externally and internally, that aligns well with that, to help that executive, you know, make the right decision with their team. And so I think the expectations piece, I think, is super important around sales process when you get a C-level involved. And I think just being realistic around that, I think is important to understand, to make sure that you're getting the most out of every interaction, and preparing for that to make sure that you continue to kind of move things forward.
Mm.
Yeah, I love it. And don't ask questions you can Google.
Yes. Whoever put that in the chat, that's an amazing, I feel like that's an amazing, we're all going to steal that piece. So I love that. As we talked about, Drift is host this webinar. You know, Brooke and myself are both work at Drift, and we have an ebook coming out, Game Changing Go-to-Market, that you can, that's linked to here. I'm sure we send as part of the resources as well. That has a lot of these best practices from ourselves, others in the industry, to help you be successful, certainly in this environment. So I hope you get a chance to check that out, and really enjoyed the discussion today. Thank you, Brooke, Katie, Ted. Awesome. Had a great time with the conversation of how to sell faster to C-suite, and thanks for all the engagement today on part of the webinar.